Poor boys return lost watch to millionaire. And he does the unthinkable. Joshua Thomas held the shiny object between his trembling hands, while his younger brother, Ethan James, looked anxiously around the busy Broadway in downtown New York City. The golden watch they had found near the trash can seemed to be worth more than everything they had ever seen in their lives. "Josh, we could sell this and buy food for the whole week," whispered Ethan James, just 9 years old, tugging at the worn shirt of his 12-year-old brother. "Grandma won't even know." Josh shook his head firmly, running his thumb over the watch glass that reflected the sunlight. Even with his stomach growling and knowing they didn't even have money for breakfast bread, something inside him said it wasn't right. "No, Ethan. Grandma always taught us we should return what isn't ours. Let's look for the owner." The younger boy made a face, kicking a can on the dirt ground. "But Josh, just look at this watch. It must belong to some rich person who won't even miss it. And we're in need." Josh looked at his brother with the same serious expression he always used when he had to make difficult decisions. Ever since their grandmother, Grandma Betty, started forgetting things, he had become responsible for taking care of Ethan James. It was a heavy burden for his 12 years, but he took his role as older brother seriously. "We're going to do what's right, Ethan. Come on, let's ask in the stores if anyone knows who it belongs to." The two boys began walking through the busy streets of the commercial district. Josh kept the watch hidden in the pocket of his patched pants, afraid someone might try to take it from them. Ethan James followed, muttering quietly, but obeying his brother as he always did. The first store they entered was a small, cramped stationery shop. The owner, a man with thick glasses, barely looked up when Josh approached the counter. "Excuse me, sir, do you know anyone who lost a watch around here?" The man looked at the two boys in their worn clothes and made a suspicious expression. "A watch? What kind of watch?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. Josh showed the golden object, and the shopkeeper's eyes widened. "Boy, where did you get this? This watch looks very expensive." "We found it on the street, sir. We just want to return it to the owner," replied Josh, noticing the suspicious tone in the man's voice. The shopkeeper shook his head. "I've never seen anything like that around here. Are you sure you found it on the street?" Josh felt his cheeks flush with anger, but kept his voice calm. "Yes, sir. Thank you very much." The brothers left the stationery shop and continued their search. They went into a pharmacy, a clothing store, a small cafe, but no one knew anything about the lost watch. At every place they visited, Josh noticed the same look of suspicion from people. It was as if two poor boys couldn't possibly be doing something honest. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. After 2 hours of walking and asking, Ethan James stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and crossed his arms. "Josh, enough. Nobody knows anything. Let's just sell this watch and be done with it. We tried to do the right thing." Josh looked at his brother and saw the frustration in the brown eyes that were just like his. He knew Ethan James was tired and hungry, just like him, but something wouldn't let him give up. "One more store, Ethan. Just one more, I promise." They headed to a small jewelry store at the end of the street. When they entered, an elegant lady with graying hair looked at them with curiosity, but without hostility. "Good afternoon, boys. How can I help you?" Josh approached the counter and showed the watch. "Do you know the owner of this watch? We found it on the street and want to return it." The woman took the object and examined it carefully. Her eyes lit up. "Oh my goodness! This is a very special watch. Look here, there's an engraving. 'To my son Richard, with eternal love, Dad.' This watch belongs to Richard Calloway." "Richard Calloway?" asked Josh, not recognizing the name. "Yes, the businessman. He owns several companies here in the city. A very wealthy and respected man. Do you know exactly where you found it?" Josh pointed in the direction of the street. "Over there near the trash can on the corner." The woman shook her head, thoughtful. "How strange. His office is quite far from here, but I'm sure this watch is his. I've seen him wearing it several times when he comes here to buy gifts for employees. Would you like me to call him?" Josh's eyes shone with relief. "Yes, please." The jeweler picked up the phone and dialed a number. After a few minutes of conversation, she hung up and smiled at the boys. "He's coming over. He said he lost the watch yesterday and was desperately looking for it. You boys did a good deed." Josh felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of relief and nervousness. Ethan James, on the other hand, seemed disappointed not to be able to sell the watch. 20 minutes later, a shiny black car stopped in front of the jewelry store. A tall man in a dark suit with graying hair entered the store. Josh immediately recognized that he was someone important by the way he dressed and carried himself. "Mrs. Margaret, where are the boys who found my watch?" asked the man, and Josh noticed his voice was a bit shaky. "Right here, Mr. Richard. Josh and Ethan James," said the jeweler, pointing to the brothers. Richard Calloway looked at the two boys, and Josh saw something in his eyes he couldn't identify. It seemed like a mix of surprise and emotion. "I have found my watch?" he asked, kneeling to be at the boy's eye level. Josh extended his hand with the golden object. "Yes, sir. We found it near the trash can over there on the corner." Richard took the watch with trembling hands and pressed it to his chest. For a moment, Josh thought the man might cry. "This watch," began Richard, his voice choked. "It was my father's. It's the only thing I have left of him." Josh felt a shiver. Now he understood why the man seemed so emotional. "Where do you live?" asked Richard, discreetly wiping his eyes. "In Brooklyn, sir, with our grandma," replied Josh. "And your parents?" Josh looked down. "We don't have any, sir. Just Grandma Betty." Richard was silent for a few seconds, observing the two boys. He noticed their worn but clean clothes and the politeness with which they spoke. "You didn't want to keep the watch. You must know it's worth a lot of money." "Grandma always taught us that we should return what isn't ours," said Josh, repeating the words he had used with his brother. "Even when you're in need." Josh looked at Ethan James, who kept his eyes on the ground, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "Yes, sir. Doing the right thing is more important." Richard watched Josh for a long moment. There was something familiar about that boy, in the way he spoke, in his determined posture despite the poverty. "What are your full names?" "Joshua Thomas Wilson and Ethan James Wilson, sir." "And your grandmother, what's her name?" "Elizabeth Wilson. She was a teacher, but now she's sick and forgets things," explained Josh, sadness in his voice. Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Elizabeth Wilson. The name echoed in his mind like a distant bell. It couldn't be the same person. "Where did your grandmother teach?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "At the neighborhood school. Grandma Betty taught many children for over 30 years, replied Ethan James, speaking for the first time since the businessman arrived. Richard slowly stood up, his heart racing. The pieces were starting to fall into place in his mind. The area where they found the watch, their grandmother's name, the age she would be. "Boys, I would very much like to meet Grandma Betty. Would you take me to her home?" Josh and Ethan James exchanged glances. It was strange for a wealthy man to want to visit their humble home. "Sir, our house is very simple," said Josh, embarrassed. "I don't mind. Please let me repay your kindness in some way." Josh hesitated. He didn't like accepting help, but there was something sincere in the man's voice that made him trust. "All right, sir, but Grandma sometimes doesn't recognize people." "That's fine. Let's take my car." The car ride was quiet. Josh and Ethan James had never ridden in such a luxurious vehicle. Richard, on the other hand, was lost in memories he had tried to forget for years. With every block they got closer to Brooklyn, the memories became more vivid. When they reached the dirt road where the boys lived, Richard asked the driver to stop. He got out of the car and looked around. Small, simple houses, children playing in the street, clothes hanging on the lines. It was exactly how he remembered his own childhood. "Our house is that one over there," said Josh, pointing to a small brick house with a little garden in front. Richard followed the boys, his legs feeling shaky. When Josh knocked on the door, a sweet voice answered from inside. "I'm coming, my boys." The door opened, and there stood a lady about 70 years old, white hair tied in a bun, wearing a simple floral dress. When her eyes met Richard's, she froze. "Richard," she whispered, bringing her hand to her chest. "Richard Calloway." Richard felt tears welling up in his eyes. It was her, Grandma Betty, his first teacher, the woman who changed his life when he was just a poor boy from the same neighborhood. "Grandma Betty," he said, his voice choked. "You remember me?" Josh and Ethan James looked confusedly at each other. How did their grandmother know this wealthy man? "My boy," said Grandma Betty, stepping closer and touching Richard's face. "How you've grown. How distinguished you look." "Grandma, how do you know Mr. Richard?" asked Ethan James. Grandma Betty smiled with tears in her eyes. "Richard was my student, one of the most special boys I ever had the pleasure of teaching." Richard knelt before the woman who had been so important in his upbringing. "Grandma Betty, your grandson's returned something very valuable to me, my father's watch." "The watch?" she said, confused. "What watch?" Josh stepped closer to his grandmother. "Grandma, we found a watch on the street and returned it to the owner. It's him, Mr. Richard." Grandma Betty looked at her grandsons with pride. "My boys did the right thing. I always teach them that." "You always did teach that," said Richard, standing up. "You taught me the same thing when I was Josh's age." Josh looked at Richard with curiosity. "You lived here in the neighborhood?" "Yes, Josh, right nearby. I was poor like you, and Grandma Betty was the one who showed me I could be more than people expected of me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Grandma Betty invited Richard into the house. The living room was small but clean and tidy. There were few pieces of furniture, but everything was arranged with care. On the wall, family photographs and a framed piece with an embroidered phrase, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Richard sat on the simple sofa and looked around. It was almost identical to the house he grew up in, just a few blocks away. "Grandma Betty, I remember when you said I could be anything I wanted to be, as long as I studied and never forgot where I came from," said Richard, his voice emotional. "And you became a successful man," she replied, smiling. "I always knew you would go far." Josh and Ethan James sat on the floor, fascinated by the conversation. "Grandma, is Mr. Richard really rich?" asked Ethan James, with the typical curiosity of a child. "Ethan!" scolded Josh, embarrassed by his brother's direct question. Richard laughed. "It's okay, Josh. Yes, Ethan James, I have money. A lot of money. But you know something? I forgot something very important along the way." "What?" asked both boys at the same time. "I forgot to give back to the world what the world gave me. I forgot the people who helped me when I needed it." Grandma Betty touched Richard's hand. "It's never too late to remember, my son." Richard looked at the two boys who were watching him attentively. "Boys, you reminded me today of who I really am, where I came from, and what I promised to do when I grew up." "What promise?" asked Josh. Richard smiled and took a wallet from his pocket. From it, he pulled out a yellowed, carefully folded paper. "This is an essay I wrote when I was 12, the same age as you, Josh. Grandma Betty kept a copy all these years." Grandma Betty smiled. "I kept the best essays from my students. Yours was always special." Richard unfolded the paper and began to read. "When I grow up, I will be rich to help poor children like me. I will build schools and give jobs to the people in my neighborhood. I will never forget where I came from and will always remember that other people helped me when I needed it." Josh and Ethan James listened in silence, impressed. "Did you really write that?" asked Josh. "I did, and I completely forgot about it for the last 20 years. Richard folded the paper again and put it back in his wallet. "Grandma Betty, how are things here in the neighborhood? Is the school still running?" She sighed. "The school closed 5 years ago, Richard. There was no funding. The children now have to walk very far to study. Many don't even go to school anymore. And the health clinic? Also closed. To see a doctor, you have to go downtown. It's very hard for the elderly and for those who don't have money for transportation." Richard fell silent, processing the information. He looked at Josh and Ethan James. "And you, boys? Do you go to school?" "I do," said Josh, "but it's far. I wake up at 5 in the morning to get there on time." "And you, Ethan James?" The younger boy looked down. Sometimes I miss school to take care of Grandma when she's not well. Grandma Betty sighed. I get confused sometimes. I forget where I put things, I forget people's names. The boys worry about me. Richard felt his heart tighten. That extraordinary woman who had dedicated her life to educating children now needed care and he didn't even know. Grandma Betty, have you been to the doctor? It could be something treatable. Doctors are expensive, Richard, and far. The boys already have enough work taking care of me. What work do you do? Asked Richard, looking at Josh. I help Mr. Johnson at the workshop after school. He pays me a little to sweep and organize the tools. Ethan James sells little sweets that Grandma makes when she's feeling well. Richard realized how those boys had taken on responsibilities far too heavy for their age. It was exactly like his own childhood. Boys, I would like to repay your kindness. Let me help with the costs of the doctor for Grandma Betty. Josh shook his head immediately. No, sir. We only did what was right. We don't want anything in return. Josh is right, agreed Ethan James. Grandma always said that doing good shouldn't expect a reward. Richard smiled. Those boys had stronger values than many adults I knew. It's not a reward, it's gratitude, and it's also a way for me to keep the promise I made many years ago. Josh looked at his grandma, who nodded. If that's the case, then it's okay, said Josh hesitantly. Richard stood up. Tomorrow morning, I'll send for Grandma Betty to have an appointment with the best neurologist in the city, and you'll come with me so you won't worry. Mr. Richard, said Grandma Betty, you don't need to do this. Yes, I do, Grandma Betty. You saved my life when I was a child. You showed me I could dream. Now it's my turn to repay you. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the conversation with Grandma Betty and the boys. How had he drifted so far from his roots? How had he forgotten the promise he had made? The next morning, a comfortable pickup truck stopped in front of Grandma Betty's house. Richard got out and knocked on the door. Good morning, ready for the appointment? Josh opened the door, already dressed in his best clothes, which were still patched in some places. Good morning, Mr. Richard. Grandma is getting ready. Minutes later, Grandma Betty appeared wearing a light blue dress and a knitted coat. She was visibly nervous. It's been a long time since I've been to the doctor, she said, adjusting her hair. Don't worry, Grandma Betty. Dr. Michael is a very kind man. He'll take good care of you. The trip to the private hospital was an adventure for Josh and Ethan James, who had never seen such tall and modern buildings. Richard watched the boys' reactions and remembered his own amazement when he saw the city for the first time. At the hospital, they were welcomed by the medical staff as if they were family. Dr. Michael, a middle-aged man with a paternal demeanor, examined Grandma Betty carefully and attentively. Grandma Betty has early-stage senile dementia, the doctor explained to Richard privately. But it's something that can be treated and controlled with medication and some memory exercises. Her condition can improve significantly. Richard felt immense relief. What is the cost of the treatment? The monthly follow-up comes to about $2,000, including appointments and medication. For Richard, that was an insignificant amount. For Grandma Betty's family, it would be impossible. You can start the treatment today. I'll take care of all the costs. When they left the hospital, Grandma Betty already had the first medications and a schedule of exercises to do at home. Richard, she said, holding his hand, how can I repay so much kindness? Grandma Betty, you already repaid it long ago. When you taught me to read, when you showed me I was capable, when you believed in me. Josh and Ethan James walked alongside, still amazed by everything they had seen. Mr. Richard, said Josh, why are you doing all this? Richard stopped walking and knelt in front of the boys. Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten. You reminded me that there is kindness in the world and that people can do good without expecting anything in return. It was just a watch, said Ethan James. No, Ethan James. It was much more than a watch. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. What? They both asked at the same time. My conscience, my heart. In the following weeks, Richard developed the habit of visiting Grandma Betty and the boys every day after work. He brought fruits, medicine, books for Josh, and toys for Ethan James. But most of all, he brought his presence and attention. The visits became everyone's favorite time of the day. Grandma Betty visibly perked up when she heard his car stopping in front of the house. The medicine was taking effect, and her memory was gradually improving. "Richard," she said one Saturday afternoon, "do you remember the essay about the boy who wanted to change the world?" "Of course I remember, Grandma Betty. You wrote another one, about your family. Do you remember?" Richard thought for a moment and shook his head. "I don't remember that one." Grandma Betty stood up and went to an old piece of furniture in the living room. From inside a drawer, she pulled a folder with yellowed papers. "Here it is. My special family, you wrote when you were 10 years old." Richard took the paper and began to read quietly. "My family isn't like the others. I don't have a father or a mother, but I have Grandma Sarah who raised me. She died when I was 9 years old. Now I live alone, but I don't feel alone because I have teacher Elizabeth. She takes care of me like she was my mother. One day when I grow up, I'm going to take care of her like she takes care of me." Richard stopped reading, his eyes filled with tears. "I'd completely forgotten. You helped me back then too, Richard. When your grandmother died, you had nowhere to go. I talked to social workers, managed to have you keep living in her little house, brought food, helped with schoolwork." Josh and Ethan James listened to the story fascinated. "You lived alone as a child?" asked Josh. "Yes, from 9 to 17 years old. Grandma Betty was the one who took care of me all that time." "Like we take care of her now," said Ethan James. Richard looked at the boy and felt a shiver. "That's true, Ethan James. It's exactly like you take care of her now." Grandma Betty smiled. "Life goes full circle, doesn't it? Sometimes the one who helps today is the one who will need help tomorrow." That night, Richard had a serious conversation with himself. He looked around his luxurious penthouse with a view of the entire city and realized how empty he felt despite all the material comfort. The next day, he showed up at Grandma Betty's house with a different proposal. "Grandma Betty, Josh, Ethan James, I'd like to ask you a question." "Go ahead, Richard," said the lady. "How would you feel if I bought a bigger house here in the neighborhood and all of us lived together?" Josh and Ethan James looked at each other, surprised. "Mr. Richard, we can't accept that," said Josh immediately. "Why not?" Because it would be too much. You've already done so much for us." Richard sat down at the small kitchen table where they were having coffee. "Let me explain. It's not charity, it's selfish on my part." "How so?" asked Grandma Betty. "I've lived alone for many years. I have a huge house, but it's empty. I have money, but I don't have a family. You would make me very happy if you accepted to be my family." Ethan James looked at Josh, who looked at his grandmother. "Richard," said Grandma Betty, "are you sure this is what you want?" "I am, Grandma Betty. For the first time in years, I'm sure about something." "And if it doesn't work out?" asked Josh, always cautious. "Then we try again. But I'm sure it will work out." After much discussion, they accepted the proposal. Richard bought a 3-bedroom house in the same neighborhood, with a large backyard where Ethan James could play and Grandma Betty could have her vegetable garden. The move happened over a weekend. Richard made sure to personally carry the family's few belongings. When Grandma Betty saw the new home, she cried with emotion. "It's the most beautiful house I've ever seen," she said, running her hand over the clean walls and shiny floor. "Now it's our home, Grandma Betty," said Richard, hugging the lady who had been his second mother. In the months that followed, everyone's life changed completely. Josh was able to focus better on his studies since he no longer had to worry so much about his grandmother. Ethan James went back to attending school regularly. Grandma Betty, with medical treatment and the family's affection, regained much of her clarity. Richard, in turn, rediscovered the pleasure of simple things: family dinners, conversations in the backyard, helping Josh with his homework, playing with Ethan James on weekends. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. But Richard's transformation went beyond his personal life. At work, he began questioning some practices of his companies. He realized he was paying low wages to employees who had families to support, like Josh and Ethan James. In a board meeting, Richard made a proposal that surprised everyone. "I want to double the minimum wage in our companies." The other directors looked at him as if he'd gone mad. "Richard, "This will significantly reduce our profits," said William, the financial director. "And it will improve the lives of hundreds of families. I think it's worth it." "But why do this now?" asked Jennifer, the human resources director. Richard thought of Josh and Ethan James and their daily struggle to survive. "Because it's the right thing to do." The proposal caused controversy, but it was approved. Richard used his position as majority shareholder to ensure the changes were implemented. The first reactions were surprise and gratitude from the employees. Thank you letters arrived daily at Richard's office, stories of how the salary increase had changed families' lives. At home, Richard would share these stories with Grandma Betty and the boys during dinner. "Mr. Richard," Josh said one evening, "are you really doing this because of us?" "I'm doing it because of you, because of me, because of all the families who need a fair opportunity." "But what if other business owners don't like it?" asked Ethan James. Richard smiled. "Then maybe it's time for them to learn what you taught me." "What did we teach you? That doing the right thing is more important than making money." Grandma Betty looked at Richard with pride. "You've become the man I always knew you could be, Richard." But not everything was easy. The changes Richard was implementing in his companies were generating pressure from competitors and even veiled threats. One morning, Richard received a threatening call at the office. "Mr. Calloway, your actions are bothering important people. I suggest you reconsider your decisions." Richard hung up the phone, worried, not about his own safety, but about that of his new family. That evening, he came home early and found Grandma Betty teaching Ethan James math at the kitchen table. "Richard, are you all right? You look worried," she said with her usual sensitivity. "I'm fine, Grandma Betty. Just work matters." Josh, who was doing homework in the living room, approached. "Mr. Richard, are you having problems because of us?" Richard looked at this 12-year-old boy who always showed impressive maturity. "Why do you ask that, Josh?" "Because I've noticed that since you started helping us, you're always worried. And today, you came home early, which never happens." Richard sat at the table with them. "Josh, sometimes when we do the right thing, other people don't like it. But that doesn't mean we should stop doing what's right." "So you are having problems," Josh insisted. Richard sighed. There was no point lying to these boys who knew life's difficulties so well. "Some business owners aren't happy with the changes I'm making. They think I'm setting a bad example." "A bad example?" asked Ethan James. "But you're helping people." "That's right, Ethan James, but not everyone sees it that way." Grandma Betty put her pencil down and looked seriously at Richard. "Richard, do you want to stop all this? Go back to how you were before?" Richard looked at the three faces that had become his family and felt a strength he didn't know he possessed. "No, Grandma Betty, I don't want to stop. I want to continue." "Then we'll face it together," said Josh, with a determination that impressed Richard. "No, Josh, this is my problem." "No, it's not," insisted the boy. "You said we're a family now. In a family, problems belong to everyone." Richard felt his eyes grow moist. Those boys, who had already faced so many hardships in life, were willing to face one more by his side. "All right," he said. "We'll face it together." The following week, Richard received an unexpected offer. A group of businessmen offered to buy all his companies for a value well above market price on the condition that he leave the business for good. It was a tempting offer. With that money, he could live comfortably with his new family for the rest of his life, without worries. Richard brought the proposal home and discussed it with Grandma Betty and the boys during dinner. "What do you think?" he asked. "That's a lot of money," said Ethan James, impressed by the numbers. "But, Mr. Richard," said Josh, "if you sell the companies, the employees will lose the raises you gave them, won't they?" Richard nodded. "Probably yes." "Then you can't sell," concluded Josh, as if it were obvious. "But Josh, it would be safer for us." "Mr. Richard," said Grandma Betty, "may I tell a story?" "Of course, Grandma Betty." "When you were a boy, there was a time when some parents complained that I was spending too much time with you and other poor children. They said I should focus only on their children, who paid tuition at the private school where I taught at night." Richard listened carefully. "And what did you do?" "I refused an offer to teach private lessons only for rich children, which would have paid me much more. I preferred to continue teaching at the public school in the neighborhood, earning little but helping those who needed it most. And do you regret it? Grandma Betty smiled, looking at Josh and Ethan James. Look around me, Richard. See what my choice resulted in. These two boys are my treasure, and you who became this wonderful man, it was worth every sacrifice. Richard understood the message. Do you think I should refuse the offer? I think you should do what your heart tells you. That night, Richard thought a lot before making his decision. The next morning, he called the businessmen who had made the offer. Gentlemen, I appreciate the offer, but I must decline. My companies are not for sale. The reaction was immediate. Less than a week later, Richard began to face problems on several fronts. Suppliers cancelled contracts, important clients were pressured to break partnerships, and even the bank threatened to cancel some loans. Richard came home visibly dejected on a Thursday evening. What's wrong, Richard? Asked Grandma Betty, worried. I think I made a mistake. The pressure is too great. Maybe I should have sold the companies. Josh approached and sat next to Richard. Mr. Richard, do you remember what you told me when we found the watch? What? That sometimes when we do the right thing, other people don't like it. But that doesn't mean we should stop doing what's right. Richard looked at that boy who always managed to remind him of his own words at the right moments. That's true, Josh. Then you can't give up now. But what if I lose everything? What if I can no longer take care of you? Ethan James approached and took Richard's hand. Mr. Richard, before we met you, we had almost nothing, and we were happy anyway because we were together. Ethan James is right, said Josh. You might lose the money, but you won't lose us. We're a family now. Grandma Betty approached and placed her hand on Richard's shoulder. Richard, remember what I always said when you were little and things got tough? After the storm, the calm always comes, replied Richard, remembering the words he had heard so often in childhood. Exactly. You just need to weather the storm. Richard spent the weekend reflecting. On Monday, he returned to work with renewed energy. He called a meeting with all the employees of his companies. I know you've heard rumors about difficulties we're facing, he said to the packed auditorium. It's true that some clients and suppliers are pressuring us because of the labor improvements we implemented. A murmur went through the auditorium. But I want you to know that I won't back down. I believe a company is only strong when its employees are valued. The applause started timidly, but grew until it became a standing ovation. We're going to go through a difficult period, Richard continued. Maybe some of you think it's better to look for jobs at other companies. I'll understand completely. A cleaning lady with graying hair stood up at the back of the auditorium. Mr. Richard, may I speak? Of course, Mrs. Catherine. I've worked here for 15 years. I've never seen a boss who cared about us like you do. If you're willing to fight for us, we'll fight for you. Again, applause echoed through the auditorium. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. It was the same solidarity he felt at home with his new family. In the following weeks, something extraordinary happened. The employees began to work with more dedication than ever. Overtime was done voluntarily, improvement suggestions came in daily, and productivity increased significantly. Smaller clients, who previously had no voice, began seeking out Richard's companies. The reputation of an ethical company spread, and new suppliers appeared to replace those who had cancelled contracts. At home, Richard shared these small but significant victories. You know, Grandma Betty, he said one evening while helping the lady water the backyard plants, I was thinking about how it all started. With the watch? She asked. Yes, Josh and Ethan could have kept that watch. No one would have known. They needed money. They had every reason to keep it. But they didn't. They didn't. And that changed everything. It reminded me of who I really am. Grandma Betty smiled. Do you know the most beautiful part of this story, Richard? What? You could have also given the boys a cash reward and gone on with your life. No one would have expected more than that. Richard stopped watering the plants and looked at the lady. But I couldn't. Exactly. Because deep down, you never really forgot who you are. You just needed someone to remind you. That night, Richard took out the golden watch that had caused all that transformation. It was almost midnight and the house was silent. He sat in the living room and observed the object that once belonged to his father. Josh, who had woken up to drink water, found Richard in the living room. "Mr. Richard, can't you sleep?" "No, Josh. I was thinking." The boy sat next to him. "Thinking about what?" Richard showed him the watch. "About this watch. About how something so small can change so much." Josh looked at the golden object gleaming in the lamplight. "Mr. Richard, do you think if we hadn't returned the watch things would be different?" Richard thought for a moment. "I'm sure they would, Josh. You showed me that there's still goodness in the world. That changed everything. But you were already a good person. You had just forgotten." Richard smiled. That 12-year-old boy sometimes showed impressive wisdom. "That's true, Josh. Sometimes we lose our way and need someone to remind us who we are, like Grandma does with us when we fight as brothers, exactly like your grandmother does." Josh stayed silent for a few seconds. "Mr. Richard, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you miss the life you had before, when you lived alone and didn't have to worry about us?" Richard looked at Josh and saw insecurity in the boy's eyes. "Josh, do you want the truth?" The boy nodded. "I don't remember what it was like to live without you all. It's as if you've always been part of my life. Even with all the problems that came up, especially because of the problems. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because before, when I had problems, I faced them alone. Now, I have you by my side. That makes all the difference." Josh smiled. "It's true, it's much better to face things as a family." "Did you learn that from Grandma Betty?" "I did. She always said family is who stands by you in difficult times." Richard hugged Josh. "Then we're a real family." 6 months after their first meeting, Richard received a call that would change everything again. It was from an investigative journalist who had uncovered a corruption scheme involving the businessmen who tried to buy his companies. "Mr. Calloway, I need to speak with you about the pressures you faced in recent months." Richard agreed to give an interview. When the story was published, it revealed how a group of businessmen used questionable methods to eliminate competitors who didn't follow their practices. The report caused a national scandal. Richard, who had resisted the pressures, was portrayed as an example of an ethical businessman. Invitations for lectures and interviews arrived daily. But what impressed Richard most was the reaction of ordinary people. Letters of support came from all over the country. Workers from other companies began demanding better conditions, inspired by the example of Richard's companies. "Richard," said Grandma Betty one morning while reading one of the letters, "you've become a symbol." "A symbol of what?" "That it's possible to do business honestly and still be successful." Richard picked up one of the letters and read it aloud. "Mr. Richard, I'm a mother of 3 and work in a factory. After learning your story, I showed my boss the report about your companies. He decided to raise our salaries and improve working conditions. I wanted to thank you for giving us hope." Josh and Ethan James listened to the letter attentively. "Mr. Richard," said Ethan James, "does that mean what happened with the watch is helping other families too?" "That's right, Ethan James. So, does that mean when we do something good, other people do good things too?" Richard looked at that 9-year-old boy who had just perfectly summarized the concept of social transformation. "Exactly, Ethan James. One good deed can inspire many others." Josh thought for a moment. "So Grandma was right when she said we should always do good, even when no one is watching." "Your grandmother was always right about many things, Josh." Grandma Betty smiled with teary eyes. "You 3 are my greatest pride." 1 year after the watch encounter, Richard made a decision that surprised everyone. He announced he would open his companies to public visits, turning them into examples of how it's possible to balance profit with social responsibility. The first guided tour was conducted by himself, accompanied by Josh and Ethan James. The boys, who now studied at a good school, explained to visitors how small actions can create big changes. "It all started when we found a watch," Josh told a group of college students. "We could have kept it, but our grandma always taught us to do what's right." "And do you think you made the right choice?" asked a student. Ethan James, now 10 years old and more talkative, replied, "We didn't lose a watch, we gained a family." The answer moved the visitors and became headlines in the local papers. Richard watched proudly as the boys told the story. They had grown, not just physically, but in confidence and maturity. That evening during dinner, Grandma Betty made an announcement. "I have a surprise for you." "What surprise, Grandma?" asked Josh and Ethan James simultaneously. "Remember Richard's essay about wanting to help poor children?" "Of course," said Richard. "Well, I've also kept other essays from special students over the years, and I discovered something interesting." Grandma Betty went to her room and returned with an old folder. "Josh, you remind me so much of a student I had about 15 years ago. A boy named Michael Scott." "What happened to him?" asked Josh. "He became a doctor. The same Dr. Michael who's taking care of me." Richard was astonished. "Dr. Michael was your student?" "He was. And do you know what he wrote in an essay when he was Josh's age?" Grandma Betty opened the folder and took out a yellowed paper. "When I grow up, I'll be a doctor to take care of the teachers who took care of me when I was little." Silence fell over the table. "You mean Dr. Michael also," began Josh, "was also transformed by the education and affection he received as a child," completed Grandma Betty. "And do you know what's most interesting?" "What?" everyone asked. "He didn't recognize me at first. Just like Richard didn't recognize me immediately. But when he found out who I was, he decided to take care of me free of charge." Richard felt a shiver. "How many students have you had in your life, Grandma Betty?" "Thousands, Richard, and each one took a little of what I taught with them. Some became doctors, others teachers, others business owners, others honest workers who raised their children well. And they all remember you. Not all, but those who do, like you, make a difference in the world." Ethan James, who had been listening carefully, asked a question that made everyone thoughtful. "Grandma, does that mean Mr. Richard and Dr. Michael met here at our house because of you?" "That's right, Ethan James. And do you know what they decided to do together?" Richard and Grandma Betty exchanged glances as if sharing a secret. "What?" asked the boys. "They decided to build a new school here in the neighborhood," said Grandma Betty with a huge smile. Josh and Ethan James were speechless. "A new school?" asked Josh. "A new school," confirmed Richard. "Dr. Michael will handle the medical part with an attached health clinic, and I will finance the construction and maintenance." "And who will be the principal?" asked Ethan James. Grandma Betty smiled. "Well, if you agree, I'd like to go back to work." The revelation left everyone emotional. Richard stood up and hugged Grandma Betty. "That would be perfect, Grandma Betty. Are you sure you feel well enough for this?" "Richard, since I started treatment, I feel better every day, and you give me strength to face any challenge." Josh approached his grandmother. "Grandma, will you be able to teach other children like you taught us?" "I will, my dear, and this time I'll have help from both of you." "Our help?" asked Ethan James. "You'll be my special assistants. You'll help welcome new children, tell the watch story to show the importance of doing good." Richard looked at his family and felt a happiness he had never experienced before. "Grandma Betty, I have one last surprise." "What is it?" Richard took an envelope from his pocket. "I managed to locate your birth certificates, boys. I would like to officially adopt you if you agree." Josh and Ethan James looked at each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. "Does that mean we'll really be your sons?" asked Josh, his voice choked up. "Really, if you want to." The two boys threw themselves into Richard's arms, crying with joy. Grandma Betty watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "Richard, you've become the man I always dreamed you would be. I only made it here because of you and these two extraordinary boys." 6 months later, the Elizabeth Wilson School was inaugurated with an emotional ceremony. The entire community was present, as well as local authorities and even journalists from other states. Josh, now 13 years old, gave a speech representing the students. "This school exists because of a lost watch and two people who decided to do what was right. My grandma always said that education can change the world. Today, we see that she was right." Ethan James, 11 years old, added, "And we learned that when you do a good thing, other people do good things too. That's how the world gets better." Richard watched his sons with immense pride. They had grown so much, not just in their studies, but as people. Grandma Betty, wearing a new blue dress and with a radiant smile, cut the ribbon for the inauguration. At 72 years old, she was beginning a new phase of her life as the principal of the school that bore her name. "Mrs. Wilson," said the town mayor, who was present at the ceremony, "do you have a message for the children who will study here?" Grandma Betty approached the microphone. "Children, I want you to always remember one thing. It doesn't matter where you come from or what your family situation is. You can be anything you want to be as long as you study and never forget to do good." The applause was long and emotional. After the ceremony, Richard, Grandma Betty, Josh, and Ethan James went home together as a family. In the car, Richard looked in the rearview mirror and saw the boys sleeping, leaning against each other. "Grandma Betty, I never imagined I could be this happy." "Happiness comes when we stop thinking only about ourselves and start thinking about others," she replied wisely. "Did you always know all this was going to happen?" Grandma Betty smiled. "Richard, I knew you had a good heart. You just needed an opportunity to remember that. And the boys? Did you know they would return the watch? Knowing the upbringing they received and the character they have, yes, I knew." Richard thought for a moment. "So all this was destiny?" "No, Richard. It was choice. The three of you made the right choices at the right times. Destiny just created the opportunities." When they got home, Richard helped carry the sleeping boys to their rooms. Then he sat with Grandma Betty on the porch watching the stars. "Grandma Betty, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Did you keep essays from all your students?" Grandma Betty laughed. "No, Richard. Only from the special ones." "And how did you know which ones were special?" "By their eyes, my son. The eyes always show when a child has a good heart, even when circumstances are difficult." Richard looked at the house where he now lived with his family. A simple house, but full of love and joy. "Grandma Betty, I'd like to ask you a favor." "What is it?" "Keep saving the essays of the special children. One day, they too will need to remember who they are." "I already have, Richard. I already have." End of the story. And so, a simple act of honesty by two children transformed not only their own lives, but the life of a businessman, and consequently, the lives of hundreds of other people. The watch that Josh and Ethan James found wasn't just an object of material value, it was a symbol that small actions can lead to big changes. The Elizabeth Wilson School became a benchmark for quality education, and many other schools were built following the same model. Richard expanded his concept of socially responsible businesses, inspiring other entrepreneurs to follow the same path. Josh graduated in business administration and became Richard's partner in managing the social enterprises. Ethan James chose to be a teacher, following in his grandma's footsteps. Grandma Betty worked at the school until she was 80 years old, always keeping the best essays from her special students. The golden watch was donated to the school museum, where it is displayed with a plaque that says, "This watch teaches us that doing what is right is worth more than any material treasure." And you, what did you think of this touching story? Do you believe small actions can really transform lives? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most and whether you've ever experienced or witnessed something similar. Leave your like if the story touched your heart, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.